Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the State of the Program series on the Crossover U College Hoops Talk podcast. My name is Kanaye. I'm joined with Josh, and today we get to talk about Tennessee, Rick Barnes' squad out in Knoxville, how they're looking going into this next season. They've lost a lot of players to both the graduation and the transfer portal. They've added some, bringing in some marquee freshmen, and we're going to talk about how they stack up in both the SEC, how we feel about them in terms of their ceiling nationally, and just what the vibes are in Knoxville going into next season. But before we get into that today, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on this channel, it goes a long way with any engagement you can do with our videos, whether it's liking, subscribing, or just telling others about us. It really goes a long way to growing what we do here at the Crossover. So let's get right into with what Tennessee has lost. Again, it's a lot. They're losing their leading scorer from this past year, Chaz Lanier, who won the Jerry West Award for the best shooting guard in the country, was, I believe, a second-team All-American, alongside Zakai Ziegler, who was a staple of the program for the last 5 years. Leadership, toughness, defense, playmaking he brought, it's going to be something that they're going to obviously have a tough time losing. I know he did have the loss against the NCAA trying to get a sixth year of eligibility that obviously was denied, so he will not be with the program anymore. They are also losing some important bench pieces like Jordan Gainey, Igor Milicic Jr., Jemai Mashack, D-Stone Dubar, who didn't really play the best for Tennessee's past year. Cameron Carr was in a little bit of a reduced bench role as well. But it's a lot that they're losing here. For a score, I'd probably throw out a 4.
Yeah, this is just painful. I mean, I get it that you kind of had to lose all these guys. They all graduated. Nobody here really transferred, but you're losing 4 of your 5 true stars. And Felix Okpara kind of fit in as well as a starter, but Jemai Mashack was great off the bench. Had that famous buzzer beater against Alabama, if you remember, from last season. Right. I think that what is being lost is tragic, and you can't really sum it up any better. I think a 4 probably is best. I'd put it lower if anybody else transferred, but this is just because you couldn't keep it.
Yeah, it's definitely... There's not too much Tennessee could have done, but it's so hard to ignore what they lost. The scoring that Chaz Lanier brought, the dynamic shooting, the off-the-dribble creation, it's something that's so hard to replace. Granted, I think they were able to hit on a few guys in the portal this offseason that might be able to kind of help fill that role collectively. But losing to Zakai Ziegler, I don't think you can speak enough on the leadership and toughness he brought to that program. He was so much of Tennessee's identity over the last few seasons with Delta Connect. And then this past year alongside Chaz Lanier. It's going to be so hard to replace not only those guys, but you mentioned Mashack, you mentioned Gainey, Milicic. It's a lot, and I think a 4 is probably the right score to give here. Now, in terms of ads, before we talk about the exciting transfers and freshmen they're bringing in, I think it's important to talk about what they brought back. That being Felix Okpara, who's going to anchor down the paint down low as center once again this year. JP Estrella is coming back. He'll probably be in a bench role. I know he dealt with the injury this past year. We'll see how he comes back from that. It can definitely be in store for big jumbles. But Cade Phillips are also returning alongside Bishop Boswell, 2 guys in bench roles who might have to play larger roles, just considering that the depth this year isn't great for Tennessee. But the transfers, which I'll let Josh get into, is where it gets really exciting.
Yeah, Tennessee brought in 3 transfers, the biggest one being Jacoby Gillespie, who was given a complete bag of a contract. He had 15 points per game at a really decent Maryland team last year. Behind him is Jalen Carey, who had 8 points per game coming off the bench at a really decent Vanderbilt team across the block. So he has that SEC and, I guess, Tennessee experience. And Amari Abram, who is that power, non-power 5 guy who can come in and really shake things up. He likely wound up also being a starter on this roster, but not like a crazy 20 per game guy like a Chaz Lanier or a Dalton Neck. He really averaged 12, but efficient numbers at Louisiana Tech. Beyond that, the big talk of the town for Tennessee was landing the number 4 overall incoming freshman named Ament. He had a crazy journey to get here, but he arrives alongside Dwayne Brown and Amari Evan as 3 top freshmen, alongside Troy Henderson and Clarence Masamba as non-ranked additions.
Yeah, I think the freshman class is really talented, and you speak on Nate Ament. Nate Ament has a chance to really be the kind of go-to guy playing out on the wing this year for Rick Barnes. I'm not saying he's going to be as good as either one of these 2 guys, but he kind of fits the mold of being that taller wing with length, like a Cooper Flagg or AJ DeBance, who can do a lot offensively as well as guard out on the perimeter on defense. Now the thing with the roster construction here is I think the way Rick Barnes runs his systems, both offensively and defensively, is going to have to change quite a bit. The last 2 years, you had really talented who could score 30 on any given night between Chaz Lanier last year and Delta Connect 2 years ago. this year, your kind of go-to guys playing out on the wing and Nate Ament. So that's going to be interesting to see how it changes. You don't really have that high-level scoring transfer like a Lanier or Kanaye this year. I mean, a lot of people will obviously turn to Gillespie and say, hey, maybe he can be that guy. I just think the playmaking duties that are on his plate this year as really the best passer on this year's roster, I think that might kind of hurt his scoring numbers a little bit. And Amari Abram, I think, is largely there to be a scorer as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how Rick Barnes figures this whole thing out.
Yeah, there is definitely a very new change for Barnes. Barnes has reconstructed rosters very slightly in his past, but this is not like anything else we've seen before. That said, what he brought in with Gillespie and Ament particularly is nice. My only question is, where is the next Chaz Lanier? Where is the next Dalton Netsch? This program for the past 3 years has had a guy come out of nowhere, or not really out of nowhere, but has primed itself to be a good team because of the development of transfers or additional places. I think Ament can be that replacement, but I'm not too convinced. I feel like there's a lot of concerns around particularly him, especially if he's the main ball handler. And also, how does he stack up with Gillespie? Who is the main ball handler? Is there a Batman and Robin situation like there was last year? What comes out of this roster that makes it good? And I just don't really know what to get at it. It's not bad, but it's probably like a 6 or a 7.
I would probably go 7 here. I do think getting a Met is really, really big time. Gillespie, too, it was one of the better point guards in the portal. And I think landing him, you are paying both Met and Gillespie a good sum of money between those two guys. So I think they're going to have to perform. I think they will play at a fairly high level. And just because of those two guys alone, I think I'm willing to give Tennessee a 7 here for ads.
Yeah, I think that's
Now, before we talk about Rick Barnes, let's talk about what me and Josh think the projected starting lineup will be for Tennessee this upcoming season. We both believe Jacoby Gillespie, Amari Abram, Nate Ament, Jalen Carey, and Felix Lakpar will round out the starting five for them. I think you have solid size between your wings and your center in Akpara. Carey is around 6'8", averaged 8 and 5 in the SEC this past season, so I think he should fit in quite well there at the 4. Nate Ament's around 6'9", so again, good length and size there. And then Gillespie and Abram, I think that's a really dynamic scoring backcourt if Abram is able to efficiently make the jump to the high major level, just considering he played at Louisiana Tech at the mid-major level this past season. That's always a concern when you're bringing in a mid-major guy. You never know how it's going to translate when they are playing up a level in competition. But Gillespie has the experience, played in the Big Ten, should be more than fit to play in the SEC, I believe. And overall, it is a really solid starting five.
Yeah, I definitely feel like this team, while not too deep, can use its guard play very well. And the freshmen can show off, especially Nate Ament. I think he is a high ceiling, high floor, or low floor type of player. But like I said before, if he's the main ball handler, I'm a little bit more concerned than I would be if Gillespie was the main guy.
Definitely. You mentioned the depth. Something that does concern me quite a bit is they have solid depth in their front court and with their bigs. It's just what happens if one of those guys in the backcourt between Gillespie and Abram get hurt? I'm really, really worried about what or where, who Rick Barnes will turn to if one of those guys goes down with an injury, if one of those guys maybe isn't panning out like in Abram, just consider we don't know how he's going to play at the high major level. And for that kind of worries me a good amount. But in terms of the starting lineup, I think it is a pretty solid 5.
Definitely.
Now, to get into Rick Barnes, this is a really interesting scenario here because off recording, Josh reminded me that Tennessee has the most tournament appearances without making a Final Four. They have yet to make the big dance. And honestly, I think they're just going to add another year to the list. I don't love the ceiling for this team. And Rick Barnes honestly doesn't have the greatest March track record. He has had good moments, and he has had some tough luck running into some juggernauts in March like they did Purdue 2 years back and this past year. Against was it Houston that they ran into?
Yeah.
So it's tough when you have to go against one seeds in the tournament. I definitely think the opportunity for them to make the Final Four this past season was definitely there. I honestly had them making the Final Four for a while when the brackets came out, but of course that's not what ended up happening. Rick Barnes, it's interesting because he doesn't normally bring in highly touted freshmen the way he is this year with Nate Ament. And I'm curious to see how he kind of handles that, where you could argue Nate Ament's probably the best freshman prospect he's bringing in since he was at Texas and had Kevin Durant. Again, he's probably going to have to change the way he runs his system offensively, considering you don't have a dynamic scoring guard you're bringing out of the transfer portal who has college experience. Your go-to guy this year is a freshman who obviously, are you going to trust the youth here or are you going to fall back more on the likes of someone like a Jacoby Gillespie?
Once again, and I've said this so many times now in this video, Kentucky and honestly a ton of other teams are just getting better coaching schematics. They're moving ahead of what it is now an older Barnes. Like he's
Right.
kind of in his final few years here at Tennessee, in my opinion, and he's kind of going out without a bang. And this is probably going to be a year that really shows to you possibly how disappointing it can be. I think that this team shouldn't be horrible. They will win the tournament, but it's not like the 2 seeds they were last year. This is a team that really I don't expect to make it to the second weekend. And that's not something you want to see from a guy as talented in the coaching department as Barnes. I still want to give him a 7 because I like him and like the upside of his coaching. And only with a guy like Barnes would this roster be good. This is a roster that'd be probably bottom 5 in the SEC if it was not for him.
Yeah, I think I am also a big Rick Barnes guy too, and I think this is going to be a defining year for him, looking back on his coaching legacy. But I think a 7 would probably be the fair score to give here. We kind of just got to see how he's able to figure out the metrics and inner workings of the lineups and roster of this roster when he puts it out on the game floor. Now, to get to where they stack up in the SEC, me and Josh definitely both view Tennessee as a more of a middle of the pack squad this year. They're not as good as Florida. They're not as good as Kentucky. They're not as good as neither Alabama or Auburn, in our belief. And I just don't know. I think there's a low floor here. There is a high ceiling, but the low floor definitely concerns me quite a bit going into conference play.
Yeah, I think the floor is honestly more than the ceiling right now because they could be a bottom team in the SEC regardless of what happens. The SEC is obviously going to be a 12 to 14 team conference game with tournament bids, and it's never going to be fun. But Tennessee's been above water for the past 2 years
Right.
with those opportunities. You look at the roster now and you look at how everybody else is arming themselves in such a better way, and Tennessee is left behind, in my opinion. I feel like they're definitely in line to be somewhere between that 5 to 8 spot in
Yeah.
the SEC, but that's non-competitive, in my opinion. This is a team that will lose to Florida. It will lose to a team like Kentucky. It will not be competitive against a team like an Auburn or Bama unless it's in Knoxville. I really feel like this team cannot win the necessary road games they need to win to stay competitive in the SEC. Kind of want to give them a 5, to be honest with you, because this is
Yeah. I was also going to go 5 here too. I just think the SEC is such a gauntlet. It's going to be this year like it was this past year. There is a lot of opportunity for big quad one games they're going to play, but they're out of conference scheduling. They're not going to be coming across many quad one games, so they really need to put a lot of emphasis on how well they play in league. And I just worry a lot because I don't think they're towards the top of the conference. I think they're very much maybe just a tier above middle of the pack in the SEC this going into this next year. And I think a 5 would definitely be the right score to give. So now getting into the vibes in Knoxville this year, how do you feel if you're a Tennessee Volunteers fan?
I'm honestly disappointed. I already should be disappointed about football considering what's happened there. But as a volunteer who's witnessed 2 great years of some of the best basketball that Tennessee's ever functioned, and you can't even get to a semi-similar level, like this team really does concern me. I think as a fan, it would concern me even more. That said, the opportunities of Nate Ament, like you said, the best Rick Barnes freshman since Kevin Durant. They're not on the same level. I'm not trying to compare them in that way, but
Yeah.
Ament is still a top 5 prospect for a reason. I don't care what that really means to you, but it's still a huge deal for a guy like him to come to a program like Tennessee that's not used
Right.
to having. Tennessee hasn't had a prospect like him, I don't think, ever, if you're going to ask me. And to see what he can do could be amazing. He could be the best freshman in the SEC next year. I honestly think he is in line for it, but I just don't know where he goes and what his opportunities can be. And because there's more, cons than pros, I don't want to give this a 6. So I think that the floor is definitely a lot more open.
Yeah, I think a 6 is a good score to give here. The floor is low, but I will give Tennessee the benefit of the doubt. The last 2 years, you kind of had surprisingly really, really good seasons. Delta Connect was a pleasant surprise coming out of nowhere from the mid-major ranks. The next year, you follow that. You say, who's going to replace Delta? Can it be Chaz Lanier? Chaz Lanier stepped up and did it and was, again, another pleasant surprise for Rick Barnes and Volunteer fans. Now, this year, you don't really know who it's going to be, but there's definitely the mold there for someone like a Gillespie or a Nate Ament to be that guy. And I think we could be very well surprised and shocked for Tennessee being really good once again this season. But at the same time, you just look at the squads around the SEC and nationally, I just don't think that they have the ceiling that the last 2 years did. So I think a 6 would probably be the right score to give.
Without a doubt. It does suck. Listen, everyone and their mom wants to see Tennessee make the Final Four at some point, especially with a guy like Barnes who's been with this program for long enough to see it through its good years. And this is not one of their good years right now. And it's a shame that it has to be because no one really wants to see a guy like Gillespie or more or less Nate Ament waste their time at a program like here, especially considering they're both in their last years in college basketball. I don't really know. It does suck, but there are great opportunities. Nate Ament can be a great player, and I hope he does. I hope he becomes the guy that a lot of people see him.
Yeah, this is definitely a team that I'm excited to watch this year just because there's always the factor that you could be shocked or where they come out of nowhere and just have a guy who takes the sport over by storm, the way Connect and Lanier did in respective years. But overall, you really just don't know how it's going to pan out for Rick Barnes this year. I think there's, again, the chance that they can go on a little bit of a run in March, but at the same time, I just don't really know if I see them as a second weekend team on this very day right now. But I think that's going to take care of everything we had on this episode today. Again, definitely, this is a team you should circle to watch. The SEC will be fun, as it was last year. A lot of good games that are going to be played. So super excited to see every team in the SEC. Tennessee is definitely one of them in action this year. But again, until the next episode, we'll see you all next time.